Giving up control is one of the entrepreneur's biggest fears when it comes to raising money. They're paranoid in some cases that if they raise a big amount of money, that investor is going to want to take control of their company because it's their money on the line. And that the entrepreneur who values most the idea that they not only control their company, but by controlling their company, they control their own lives. That's a very big give up for an entrepreneurial person. I'll even go with you one step further. A lot of entrepreneurs don't want to give up control because building their business, they've made mistakes along the way. And they're afraid that if they give that investor too much insight into the business, if they disclose too much, if they give up too much control to potentially the investor, that all these mistakes will become visible. And they're embarrassed by that. And they just don't want to do that. They don't want people seeing that. Well, I will tell you categorically, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to get used to that stuff. Okay. You've got to believe that any successful entrepreneur who came from a place of not having their own capital had to go through that. So you got to give that up. You got to get out of that. And if you're an older entrepreneur, if you're in your 50s, late 50s, 60s, and you've got to give up control of a business, that's a problem. Why? Because this is your last vestige of a business. Okay. It's your last hurrah. And you want to control it. Somebody else is going to put up money. They're going to want some control. But if you're a young entrepreneur, it's not a big deal. Why? Because even though you may not realize it, this isn't your only venture. If you're an entrepreneur, this is just one of many that you're going to have. And if it means giving up some control so that you get the capital you need to grow your business, and from that, you create some generational wealth that now when you go into your second venture, you have enough of your own capital not to ever have to think up about giving away any control of the business, and yet having access to capital to grow it as big as you want into the future. So part of how you feel about control is sort of governed a little bit about what stage of life you're in and what your future holds for you. But here's the reality of it. There are two kinds of control in a business. There's operational control, meaning you're operating the business, you have operational decisions that you make. And then there's what's called governance. Okay. That's something like the board of directors. They sit up above the company. They make the decisions as to where the company's going to go, the basic policies and procedures of the company, but they don't run the day-to-day operations. In fact, they don't have anything to say about day-to-day operations. And in fact, they don't really care about day-to-day operations. They're happy to have an operator of that company who that's their field. That's what they do every day so that they don't have to worry about that stuff. So to eliminate that investor who might insist on governance, having control of you who are doing the operations can be offset by a simple thing called KPIs, and that are called key performance indicators. And what that is you set what are called key performance indicators, which monitor revenue, profit, margins, amounts of things that have to be done over certain periods of time. You set KPIs that are standards. And then the deal you have with your investors is as long as you're meeting the standards, as long as everything is going according to everyone's expectations, they have nothing to say about how you run the business. Nothing. You do it. It's all you. And the only time they get to say anything is if the KPIs are no longer being met. So you're not making a profit. You're losing money every year. Well, I'm sorry, guys. If you're losing money every year, you simply don't deserve to run the business, and you deserve somebody to rap you on your knuckles and say, shape up, okay? Or we're going to replace you. And you know what? If you're an owner of that business and you're losing money every year and your governance board has to come in and replace you, you should thank your lucky stars because they just saved you from losing your equity value in your business. The reason you deserve to be the operator, the reason you deserve to run the company is because you're capable of positive performance. Performance in a business is everything. If a business doesn't perform, it doesn't deserve to exist. And you've got to get comfortable with that reality of what business is. And now, once you're there, you can give away all the capital in the world. You look at the biggest entrepreneurs, the Bill Gates of the world, the Jobs of the world, right? Steve Jobs. At the point that they exited their companies, they owned 10%, 12%. The public owned 50, 60% of the company. Other big investors owned 10, 20, 30% of the company. And they didn't have control. They had operational control. Why? Because they knew what to do. They knew how to build the company. They knew how to make it earn profits. They had a value, the folks who had governance that gave them control of operations. So you need to have this diversion of how you think your business. So there's governance and there's operations. What you want is control of operations. You don't want anybody telling you how to run the business. And then at some point, guess what? You don't even want control of operations because it's a day-to-day grind. All right. And what you're going to want to do is join the board, be one of the people up on top, be a part of an 18 group of people that you're going to love communicating with because they're all smarter than you are. And you're going to learn from them and you're going to benefit from them. And together you govern the business with other people having the day-to-day headaches of operation. So you got to look at that business in a much bigger context of how do you use it to generate multi-generational wealth, leverage yourself and your ability into a much bigger and better company, and to run it when it's the right time for you to run it. And then at the time that it's not, to give it up and become part of governance. So that's my advice to aspiring entrepreneurs. Look at the big boys. Look at the big boys. Look at the folks like the Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Look at their transition of how they transverse that growth and that process. That's your goal.